That's actually close enough to a reasonable set that you're having.
Okay.
Will be fast.
Yeah, right. Because it helps you with
So we are Cbor and we have.
They have the USB dongle.
Sure, yes, okay.
Yes, I have.
I think this
Into meeting
has.
material.
Yeah, this has a refresh
Intro, yes.
problem.
We can do them from here directly, I think.
So there's a lot of people who want it, but it may not happen.
Sorry that you missed lunch.
Looks good.
Yeah, perfect.
HDMI.
This looks like it's going.
Alright, the only thing I need is power because it's much.
Okay, let me.
Which is how come I do it.
So there's a bunch of stuff. There's a.
What's going on? Yeah, you probably have to plug in both ends of the HDMI cable.
I think I'm everything else.
How's this supposed to work?
Do we need a dongle? I can shout.
No, the question is which one is the right HDMI cable?
No.
Just looking for HDMI,
We are looking for the projector.
So maybe you can ask.
There are lots of cables, but where's the great projector?
It's the out. One that goes in here. Input, no, this one. This one.
Is that
This
the
looks
one?
good because it should have a red thing on it.
no flickering. Oh, no.
Well, there are computers involved, so you have to have some patience.
Yes.
Maybe.
No. It's at least.
Am I almost? Almost.
Wonderful!
Almost.
Yeah. So the cable is broken.
All right, hang on. Let's do all the normal things that we would tell people to do.
I'm not going to reboot my computer.
No. But I'm going to disentangle it from the other high frequency source here and see if that helps.
It worked for the call meeting. Seems to have problems.
Closer.
No, it's not synchronizing properly.
We use this for the other meeting too.
Well, that was a different room, but
I mean, this one.
combination of things.
So
Does anybody have a USB-C HDMI?
I have a few more of those,
I haven't seen it before.
but I think it's more of a problem on this side.
yeah.
Let's see if this works. Let's do it from my machine. Oh, yeah, you've got the same.
It's the same model, but this
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's the same bug.
If it's that cable, we can try to finish.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah. Perfect.
We've successfully affected all of your devices.
I think we can start.
Yeah.
Slightly late, but thank you.
Not this one.
Right. So welcome everybody. You're in Cbor right now. So if that's not where you want to be, please, you're welcome to leave now. Yes. So
We're really happy you're here.
we're looking for minute takers and Jabber scribe. Can anybody volunteer? Minute
Somebody at
takers.
least- Can somebody at least relay from Jabber? No. Sorry, I'll use the mic. Can somebody at least relay from Jabber? So if somebody, yeah, okay. Thank you, Jim. And so if somebody could capture action items, thank you, Paul.
Great. So first of all, the note well. And reminder, minutes are taken, meeting is recorded, and your presence is logged in the blue sheets. This is the agenda for today. So we have the introduction now. It's going to be short. The main item is going to be CDDL, led by Carsten, I believe. And then Cbor status and the RA tags draft. Yeah, times are indicative, so we'll see. Yes, if anybody has anything they want to add or any modifications to the agenda. Okay, let's move on. So a quick status update of the working group documents right now before Carsten takes it. So for CDDL, there was a working group last call that ended the 13th of March. And this created some review comments that are going to be discussed today. And for the Cbor 7049 bis, so it's work in progress. We are version 02. The implementation matrix was updated. So thank you to those who provided the input to that. So now we have 3 implementations in the wiki. And yes. Then the array tags got 2 reviews. Thank you, Jim and Paul, for those. And it seems like it's ready for adoption after the authors reply to these reviews. So we will have a call for this document. So, Carsten, you can take it.
This is a very, very constrained pink box here. Okay, I don't have to say this because Francesca already said it. So let's go right into CDL. I'm wondering where my co-author is. Not here right now. Okay. So we had a pretty good discussion at IETF 100, and what we did after IETF 100 was to introduce cuts in maps for one specific application. So we are not introducing the general concept of cuts, but just for that one application. So we still have some time to tweak this for CDA 1.1 or something. We had a problem in Singapore about regular expressions, and the solution that came up after the meeting was using XSD regular expressions. They are a little bit weird, but which regular expression variant isn't? There's a little bit of text in the document that explains what kinds of pitfalls come with that. The main problem is that \d and \w actually are Unicode references, so you might get Indian numbers or Japanese numbers in your wonderful identifiers if you don't pay attention. And the third thing is that we defined matching rules in Appendix C. So this is a summary of what's going on in that draft. And yeah, then there were a few editorial things. We were trying to fix the terminology a little bit. And I have a slide later that we probably have to take another round at the terminology. Some fixes around the examples, and there were some cobwebs in there, and Jim reminded me this morning. There are still some cobwebs in there, so we have a little bit of work to do there as well. I also generated a freezer document. I think we should do this for every single IETF draft that we ever work on. This contains the things that will not go into CDDL 1.0. The nice thing is that we don't have to have consensus on what exactly does not go in there, but of course we have to have consensus on what does go into there. So the big cut thing, there are lots of proposals for literal notation improvements. There is a proposal to add back PCRE. There is a proposal that maybe we should allow ABNF for specifying text strings in our documents. That's interesting. And various ideas of adding a module superstructure. But all of these can be done later, so that's why they are in the freezer document. Now, on the current document, we have lots of good editorial comments, which is code for saying the text isn't that great editorially yet, even after a few rounds of improvement. And yeah, I'm wondering when are we reaching the point of diminishing returns here. But the comments we have right now are pretty good, I think. Sometimes comments tell us that what we did in the last round of editorial comments was the wrong thing and we should revert that. So we will have to find some balance on some of these issues. Okay, so there's lots of work to do here, and I don't want to minimize this, but I also want to warn people that this will not be Shakespeare at the end of the process. So to the technical issues, the main thing that gives people some pause is the map matching. There's my code. The map matching issue. So the idea behind CDDL is that we have a single concept called groups that we use for describing both maps and arrays. And groups are essentially grammars of type. So they have all the properties that you know from other grammars. They are sequential in nature. They describe linear languages. However, the linearity is something we only use for array matching, where we process the elements of the array just as we would process the characters in a language that we match with a grammar, while maps are unordered. So map matching from the grammar defined by a group actually always picks any member, not any member of the map. And that is maybe slightly unfamiliar, but it seems to work quite well. Implementation-wise, this means you actually drive the parser from the grammar, not from the text, as you would in a normal parser. And that's where most of the bugs in the current implementation comes from, because the current implementation started out with a normal parser and then morphed into a real map matcher, and this process isn't completed yet. So this requires a little bit more work on the implementation side. It also means that we do have some non-determinism there. And that may hurt in certain boundary cases. I haven't actually found a specification where it did hurt, but it's probably possible. I haven't done that yet. It's probably possible to come up with an edge case where it does hurt. Okay, so that's the map matching issue. And one specific thing that we had on the mailing list under the term map validation. Validation is not a term I normally use in the context of CTDL. Is that if we have a match and a wildcard match, the semantics of the match, which in this case are the number 4, really should have a text as a value. That is kind of counteracted by the wildcard match. So we pulled an old proposal out of the drawer, adding cuts to the language. Again, we're not doing the whole thing, but we are just doing a subset for the maps. The idea about the cut is that once something has matched, you're not going back to matching other things. You're kind of committed to that match. And exactly that works for this case as well. So once we have matched this 4 here, we are committed to finding a text value. And if we don't find a text value, then yeah, the whole thing doesn't match. So the important prerequisite to a cut doing anything is that we have to have a match. A cut doesn't do anything if there is no match. And some of the confusion was about the occurrence indicators that can happen around something that uses the cut. So how often does this tell you that 4 really maps to a text? Well, the example is not so good because there's only one 4. But if this were a more general type here, so let's say the numbers from 4 to 7 all have to be text, but we only want to have one of them. There's currently no way to write that down. So the occurrence indicator would say we have only one match, and all the other numbers between 4 and 7 would go into this wildcard. So that's a limitation of this approach, not one that has hurt me when writing CDDL, but maybe something that needs to be documented better than it is now. So what do we need to do? Again, this is being discussed. There are GitHub issues and so on. Are the remaining comments on the editorial side, or do we actually need additional technical changes? This is really one thing that we have to clarify before publishing this to ISG.
So I'm Jeffrey Yaskin. I sent you an email about this like 5 minutes ago, so clearly you didn't have time to read it. I believe that the semantics of group matching and occurrence matching are not specified, well, nearly at all. They're kind of waved at, but not specified. And kind of one way to specify them means that the cut indicator on the last slide has no effect. And I'm not sure what specification you intend to cause it to have an effect. And I think that's a technical problem, not an editorial problem. That we need a description of what causes a map to match. Basically, with this mapping, if occurrence indicators apply by saying you get a non-deterministic expansion of the occurrence indicator, then the occurrence indicator could easily appear 0 times here, causing the cut to be ignored. And we need a precise specification of that matching algorithm in order to have a reasonable RFC.
Okay, I can give you the precise specification. This is a parse expression grammar, but you probably won't be happy with that's maybe a little bit too concise. So the point about the parse expression grammar is that it's greedy. So it's trying to match as much as possible. So a key 4 would indeed match. If you model this as a non-deterministic finite automaton, then indeed you have the problem. Jim.
Jim, Shad. I'd actually like to change to modify the ordering of this thing. So you basically, if you have multiple things in a row, you start by saying you're going to match the things which are most specific in terms of keys first. So you would all match, everything that's a string, everything that's a number, and then you'd match everything that's any number, and then you'd match everything that's in it, because that would give you a better set of understanding of that. That would make all of your cuts actually apply, as opposed to if you have another cut after the star uant right now, that cut would never get applied.
Well, who's I? The specification writer can do that by just putting things down in the.
But my tool, which says, is this valid to the grammar, can't.
Your tool cannot reorder what the specification writer wrote. I agree with that. So you want a tool that actually tries to apply some ordering there, and I'm trying to understand what that ordering would be. Jeffrey.
Yeah, this is Jeffrey Eskin. I don't think it's possible in general to say this type is more specific than this other type. You can say it for for and uint, of course, but you can have, since there are choice types, they can just overlap and not be more specific than each other.
I'll answer that one first. I would basically say anything that's a value, anything that's a type, which would be constructor types, anything that's any in the order in the file. Okay, Sean Leonard. I want to express that I am opposed to introducing cuts into CDDL v1.0. Cuts can transform a context-free grammar into a context-sensitive one. An alternative, subsets or constraints, was sketched out in Singapore. From an editorial point, this is introducing new matter at the last minute when it needs to be fleshed out more over the coming months, i.e. after we get this version of CDDL out. So basically, this is similar to Jeffrey's point, not well specified and trying to do too much.
Okay, let me reply to that exactly by the words that are used in Singapore. If we want colon to be a shortcut for cut equals greater, then we have to do this now. There's no way to add this shortcut later. And this interpretation of colon is probably what most specification writers expect. So I think we should do that. Now, the alternative is essentially taking this information, the number 4 is spoken for, and smearing it out to all the other places that might possibly also match that. So for a specification writer, this means a lot of tedious work, copying over things, making sure all the cases are actually hit, and so on. And I don't think that's a good thing for a specification language. It should be possible to write concise specifications.
Jeffrey Eskin, I think it's useful to have the colon syntax act as a cut. I'm not sure that we also need the cut syntax that seems to have some more general problems. If we can do just colon, maybe that's easier to specify.
Okay.
So this is Henk speaking as a contributor. We had a long discussion about introducing cuts at the last moment and effectively how CDDLs are used. And this is, I think, the point Carsten tries to bring across here. The exception is the behavior of cuts with a syntactic connotation that is in the second example here. And that is what we experienced. So if that is not the case, this is very important to know, because it would be contradicting what we got as feedback in the last months. So if you look at the last example, I think to most of here in the room, it seems to be clear that you want for to be text. And that is the only point here. So if we do not want a simplistic syntax notation like in the last example, because it is intuitive how cuts work, we really have to decide this very, very soon. And again, I think if you look at the last example, it is very obvious what the designer of the CDL wants. So the microphone, I think, just said it. Maybe we just should try to agree or not agree on the last example and its meaning as being depicted by Carsten. And that's the important thing here. And if someone else thinks it is unintuitive to have, in the last example, for being expected to be text, then we should, make that very, very openly clear here.
So I think the interesting proposal here is to have this, but not this. And that's certainly possible. I think it's a little bit weird to have a shortcut for something you cannot write in long form. To have a shortcut for something you cannot write in long form. But yes, that would be a way to further reduce the impact of this change. I'm not sure it's enough, but
Okay. So Sean Leonard. So the point is, what you want to say is, for is text only, all the other ints are something else, right? So the slide says uint, and that means all uints except 4, right? What happens when you later want to say 5 is only a byte string? You have to put it at the top, but you can't put it at the top if you're supposed to be putting it at the bottom.
yes, so then don't do that. Don't do that. Don't put it at the bottom. I'm not sure I understand the point.
Well, okay. Unfortunately, I wish you had the slide that I thought I was seeing this morning, which was my example of if you build a group with cuts, that you can end up appending things on the bottom below the star uint, which are never enforced.
Yeah.
Which,
Right.
if somebody does an additional spec, they're going to expect it to be enforced, but it's never going to be checked by anything that uses the grammar to check. And that's one of the reasons how come I was proposing the other set of rules, because as a writer, I'm going to expect it to be enforced, and it's never going to be enforced. That's non-intuitive.
Okay. So by creating a sorting mechanisms for the elements in a group, this consideration could be allayed, right?
I think so.
Okay. Now, there are two reasons why I don't like the sorting mechanism. Well, first of all, I think the spec writer can be asked to put things in the sequence in which the spec writer wants them considered. But the main thing is I really don't know how to do this ordering. And since values are types, I cannot even parse the proposal that you made.
You say the spec writer can get it in the correct order.
Yes.
Yes, the first spec writer can get it in the correct order. The guy who writes an extension to that spec can't,
Why?
because his stuff is going to potentially be appended at the bottom.
How?
Copy and paste. They say, you include this spec from this document and append this. Because I want I can't put it in the front because I want the rule to be the same. I can't put it at the bottom because I'm going to have the wrong order on cuts. So it's like, I now have to reproduce the module over there in my document.
Well, there's a simple way around that particular consideration by giving everything but the wildcard a name. But we don't have a way for files to combine magically. The only thing we can do with files right now is concatenate them. And you couldn't concatenate something to this which extends it. So I don't know if that ever could happen. But more importantly, if you want to make sure that there is a clear separation between the ones that are bound to specific types and the wildcard, you can just give the first thing a name and then have a second rule that says, and by the way, here's the wildcard for that. And I wish I had a computer to type this on.
Sean Leonard again. The way that constraints work is that you say, with appropriate syntax, star unit goes to any first. But then the subsequent parts of this spec, you can identify specific instances of star unit goes to any. For example, when uint4 is text, and when uint5 is bit string. And then he refers to a document he's produced. The precise nature of the syntax requires a bit more fleshing out, though.
Yes.
Paul Hoffman as the minute taker. Can we take this to the list? I haven't been able to do the last few.
Yeah, so let me try to summarize. So there are some proposals that the order in the grammar should not matter, and the tool should reorder things before matching. This would, of course, only apply to maps and not to arrays. There are some proposals to have the shortcut but not the long form. And there are some proposals to not do this at all, but introduce something like constraints, which we probably would have to start developing at this point, and which would still have the problem that you have to repeat the same information in multiple places to make it work. So maybe we indeed can take this to the list from there.
Just a precision. So when you say shortcut and long form, you refer to point 2 and 1, respectively, to the slide.
This is the shortcut that apparently most people want. And this is essentially just the long form. Why does it make sense to have the long form? Because this may not be something that is allowed here syntactically. So it's pretty weird to limit the reach of this feature here by what happens to be syntactically allowed in front of a code.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so can we take this to the list from you?
Let's take it to the list and move on for now.
Okay, next item, operator precedence. Now, I'm not aware of any non-trivial computer language where people don't bitch about operator precedence. So yes, we have our share of this here as well. The operator precedence that we have in CDDL is quite logical when you are always thinking in terms of groups and types. But if you don't, it may be surprising. For instance, this thing here, plus A or B, means you can have multiple A's or B's. It does not mean you can have multiple A's and a single B, or a single B. And that may be surprising to people who think about this as a group, but in reality it's not a group. The thing after the plus is a type choice. And that's why we have slash and double slash as two different choice operators. So why this is maybe surprising in this case, the same thing in map context suddenly is very familiar. And we say we have an option, a foo member that is an integer or a text, it all makes a lot of sense. And I think most of us who have written specifications actually have 1 or 2 lines like this in their specifications. So this is really a very normal thing to do. But it's essentially the same operator precedence here. It just says a type spec can occur within a group without parentheses. So I'm not sure that this isn't just a matter of getting used to the language and the fact that groups and types are 2 different things in the language. I have thought about ways to modify the operator precedent, and I actually have another slide where I am going to propose that, but only on a very, very small scale. General changes here are probably not a particularly good idea, and they also easily lead to situations like this. So if you do a +a/b, that's a syntax error. And if we change the operator precedence to compare this over this, we would just make it easier to write syntax errors, which sometimes is a good thing because it reminds the implementer of to put in the parentheses. So but in this case, it's just an annoyance. So I think what we should do is add some more text to section 3.11, which is the one that defines the operator precedence, and maybe also include a little bit of text about asking the specification writer to use a style that doesn't actually evoke these surprises here. So just like in ABNF, where people are continuously confused when people mix concatenation and choice, we should ask people to use parentheses when they want to mix groups and types in ways that may not be obvious. Again, it's obvious here, it's not so obvious here, so the recommendation would be to place parentheses around a/b here. That's my proposal with it. Comments? One thumb
I
up.
see nothing. Yeah.
So,
This is Hank again. While I understand the problem and the necessity, this violates the rule of being not noisy, because I think this will happen all over the place. So it will be way more parentheses laden after that. And I'm just thinking of readability here and our promise that it would be easy to read and write. And I think we're moving a little bit away from here, but I understand the point that it might be a necessity. I just wanted to comment this.
Paul Hoffman, who's lazy, it's never hard to read too many parentheses. It is harder to write.
It is. You haven't read a list program recently.
No, I have. And it's never too hard to read parentheses unless you are like more than 6 or 7 levels in. And I don't think we're going to be worried about that here. Yeah, I fully agree it's hard to write, but let's not say it's going to be hard to read.
It need not be parentheses, by the way. So the reason why we are seeing this here so rarely in actual specifications is that people actually mostly define a type, the name for the a/b before putting it into a group. So they are not actually writing parentheses, they're actually providing additional documentation by giving the choice a name before using it in the group. So I think in practice, we can still make the recommendation without littering up specifications too much. But I agree that we should check that. Okay, so let's move on to Jim's review. I think we kind of half covered item 4, which was essentially about dead code with the example that you referred to that I didn't put on the slide, unfortunately. Generally, I don't think dead code should lead to hard errors, because dead code may just be the result of applying abstractions in the right way. And if you create traps in applying abstractions, you're not better off than by creating traps through dead code. However, a tool might still provide a way to give you a warning when that happens. That is undecidable in the general case, like most things about grammars, but I think tools can still capture most of the realistic cases and give some warnings in this case. So I think, yeah, with the discussion we have had, we are kind of covered on this comment. 6 is maybe an editorial comment, but just to make sure that people agree on this, there is this mechanism called generics, and it can be used for both groups and types. And the grammar actually says that, but the text doesn't. So we should say that in the text as well. There is an error in the precedence table. And actually looking more closely, there is another error. So the unary operators, ampersand and tilde, probably should get their own precedence, and then we can solve that problem as well. And finally, Jim found a problem in the grammar for the unwrap statement. There essentially was a copy and paste error here. In the grammar that is in the document, this says group name, but that is of course nonsense because unwraps are applied to types. That didn't cause any problems during testing because group name and type name are identical, have identical right-hand side. So this was, yeah, something's going away with the video. So this was a genuine copy and paste mistake. Now the other thing is that the result of the unwrap syntactically lands in the type branch of the grammar, which is only true in 1 out of 3 cases. But that's not a problem because types can be used in places where groups can be used. So it all, yeah. In the end, it all turns out right. Okay, so the only thing that I propose changing is using the proper type name here. Group name. Finally, maybe an editorial comment that is a little bit more than an editorial comment. There have been several editorial comments that essentially pointed out we are using terms confusingly, inconsistently. So for instance, there is the word entry, which is defined in a way that makes you think this is about a member and not an entry. And I think we should actually make very visible in the document that we have terms for the Cbor side and terms for the CDDL side, and these terms never mix. So the CDDL side tells you what data items match the CDDL things, but the data items are described in different language from the grammar side. Okay, that's all I have on CDDL. So we're almost in time with that.
Oh, there might be other comments.
Yes.
Jeffrey Askin. I wanted to make the very general comment that the CDDL spec is mostly written as a tutorial for how to use CDDL rather than as a specification for when Cbor items match CDDL rules. And I think before it goes to RFC, it should be written as that specification. Appendix C starts down that route, but is not complete, doesn't define all of the elements of CDDL, and is also written fairly more concisely than it should be because it's, I think, trying to be a summary of the rest of the spec rather than being the specification itself. So I would like to expand Appendix C and make that the kind of the main body of the spec, and the current main body should be a tutorial on how to do it.
Okay, I think that's a very sensible proposition. It also means we will take half a year to do the edit.
Yes.
Are you willing to help?
I don't have a lot of time, but I can spend some time helping.
if we can get to a like a pull request style, where we've got most of it sort of fleshed out, and maybe we're arguing over nits and grammar and whatnot in the short term. Like, should we set a date for that? Do you have an opinion? Does the working group have an opinion about how long we would wait for that?
Jeffrey, maybe you have a more clear opinion of how much work that would take.
There's a bunch more time.
So AD asks if it's just reordering or more, and answer is more.
In some cases, like for group matching, I don't even know the algorithm that Karsten has in mind. So that definitely has to be Karsten. For some of the other things like dot bits and unwrapping, it's clear enough, I think, that I at least am capable of writing the specification, but it takes a fair amount of time. So for instance, I might be able to sketch something in, I don't know, a month, given other constraints, but actually getting exactly what words would take longer. I don't know if that helps. And that was Jeffrey Yaskin, heard notes.
Yeah. So we did have a call last couple of IETF meetings, and the result from the working group was we want this out as quickly as possible. But yeah, I want to hear what the working group thinks. So
Sean Leonard is basically, while he appreciates the view on Appendix C versus the rest of the document, he's basically says, let's get the version 1 out now, and then we can run a more formal spec on the next version if we feel it's necessary. And plus one me.
This is Joe Hildebrand from the floor. I stood up to say roughly that, which was, I do see a ton of value in the specification being written the way you just said. One of the things we're trying to do is get a stake in the ground so that this conversation that's going on about JCR, et cetera, there's an actual sort of RFC number. That's the start of that conversation from our point of view here. At least that was one of the things that I thought we had sort of talked about. So that's just me as an individual. I have no particular, that's just my.
And if we don't have this strict constraining time, that would be great to start working on that without, rushing into.
So the one thing that I would like to have from Jeffrey is a list of those items where you don't even know what the spec says, and I sure can try to fill those in. So that will be much faster than rewriting that whole thing.
So Jeffrey Yaskin again. Having CDDL spec the way it is kind of limits where we can use it, I think. In that, for instance, I get objections when using it in web specs because it's not as precise as web specifications need to be. But clearly there is value in getting kind of the sketch nailed down. And it's fairly clear what you mean when you write CDL, given the current draft. So it's definitely not like over my dead body. We must not publish this.
That's actually super helpful to hear. So does anybody feel more strongly that we should stop and do this work now before we publish a 1.0? Just looking to see if anybody's raising their hand or going to the mic. All right. So it seems like a reasonable path that we can sort of agree to, that we know that there is still work to do, that this is a first rev. We already knew that we were going to do Abyss on this anyway, because there were a couple of features we wanted to add. And at that point, the working group could decide to take on a more structural rewrite at the same time. Alexia, are you comfortable with that approach?
Yes. For the record, yes.
All right. And you're fine with that too?
Yes. And so another point that was just discussing with Carsten is that we need to update the milestone date. So we'll do that. And yeah, we'll just in accord with what we just discussed.
When can I expect you to be done?
So Alexei, when can I expect you to be done?
So I think the GDPR will not go into effect before this is done. May 25th. So I would like to get this input from Jeffrey, but for me personally, it's a really high priority item to get this done, because I also think it's nice to have a number on it. And so this will be the most important thing for me when the IETF is over and I'm back in Germany.
So to the working group, keep reviewing this and keep checking the GitHub and see if you have any comments. So I guess we'll have a discussion in the mailing list for these points that were left, and then an update, and we'll see if we need another working group last call. And sounds reasonable to you? Okay. Good.
Okay,
So we can move on.
should I go to the next item on the agenda? Good. So the other document that this, the other main document that this working group works on is the Cbor spec. And just to remind people, this is about taking this to standards level. It's not about futzing around, but it is about learning from the first 5 years of using Cbor out there. Yeah, improvements in specification quality by now go way beyond fixing the erratas. This is an old slide here. So I think we are doing some good things. And if you want to know what taking something to standard level means, look into RFC 6410, which documents this. And we are really lucky that we don't have to do this one. Yeah, just quick update. There are more than 45 implementations now. Okay, so last time we looked at 7049 bis 01, and there were a few small changes here, plus a significant new section, the data models section. And why did we do this? Because experience has not documenting your data model, but having readers infer it from the text creates a lot of pain. Now, we invented a few terms here, and one is the term generic data model, which is essentially the set of data items that can be represented in Cbor. And we split this into a basic data model, or an unextended generic data model, and the extension points. And I think one of the successes of Cbor so far has been that we do have those extension points. And the whole point of being very specific about this is we want to enable the implementation of generic serialization implementations. So getting this ecosystem out there, getting these 45 plus implementations out there helps, and if they are interoperable, it's even better. So it really helps to write down what we were thinking about the data model. Yeah, and one thing, for instance, we decided false to null are expected to be there, undefined is a nice to have, but it's not actually expected to be there. So when you write your CTDL spec for something, you may want to use or limit the use of undefined to cases when you actually need it. So what did we do in Dash 02? Well, first of all, we accidentally duplicated the data model text, and worse, we then applied changes to both copies. So I have a little bit of editorial work to do when I come home. But I think more importantly, we can now make use of that terminology. So that there are a few places that actually are already improved with that, and I would expect the next version to have more of these places. So this is probably mostly editorial. Let's see if we find anything where we feel this is technical. More technical observation is that we have learned that people who are using Cbor want to separate the world of integers from the world of floating point values. So there is one paragraph in 7049 which essentially declares the equivalence of integers and floating point values, and that paragraph is gone. So that is a technical change. It's not really a technical change to the way Cbor is being used, because people have been doing this all the time. They have just simply ignored what was in that paragraph. But we now take heed of that. And yeah, so this means, for instance, places like key equivalence separate integers and floating points. And there are a few more places where we probably have to make sure that we maintain that separation. Now, it's very clear that there are environments that cannot do this separation very easily. And the fact that environments are different, we're not going to fix that. So there needs to be some attention to the fact when you actually define an application-specific data model. And we may want to expand that. We already have text in the JSON appendix about this, but we probably want to do this in a more general way.
So Joe Hildebrand from the floor. So in the JSON working group, we had all those notes about if you go down this path, you might end up with something that's uninteroperable. Like you depend upon the difference between these things or whatever. I'm wondering if we're going to need some of those notes. So in the JSON RFC, it says like, if you use something that looks like an integer, but it's more than 2 to the 53rd, then you're going to have a bad day, because there are a lot of implementations that don't process integers larger than that. Is this, are we going to need some of those kinds of instructions here is my question.
The kind of instruction would be slightly different because we already separate those on the serialization level.
Yeah.
So it's not the situation like in JSON where you have a number and you need to find out how am I going to process this number in my implementation. So is 10E1, is that an integer? Is that a floating point? That's a typical problem that you have when interpreting JSON and keeping integers and floating points separate. We don't have that problem.
Right. No, I get that. Never mind, it was not a useful idea. I thought it was more useful than it was.
Okay. Good. So that is that. And now for my favorite subject, I tried not even to write it on the slide, canonicalization. When we wrote the original Cbor proposal, there was a little bit of internal fight in the authors. Should we actually do this here or should we not do this? But there are some applications that actually can make use of a unique representation for each potential data model item. So let's help these people. So again, the question, of course, is, can there be generic serialization for canonical Cbor? And generally, canonicalization has certain application-dependent aspects to it. So there are things like key equivalence that really only have a meaning at the application level. So one has to be careful about that. And there are other places like floating point representation where really it depends on the shape of your application, what you actually want there. So we do want to encourage generic encoder writers to not ignore it when their users ask for canonicalization. And so how can we help them with that? And the idea is that we, as this says, that we provide some recommendations that an application can use to choose their canonicalization rules. And that's all that is in 7049, if you read it closely. Now, those rules that we originally picked, both were kind of leaky. There were quite a few places where we didn't really say anything at all. And also, there's one thing that implementers have told us in pretty certain terms was not so great, which is the key ordering. So the recommendation for key ordering will change to byte-wise lexicographic ordering, which is right now everything it says. I think we have to define what that means. But we also keep the old recommendation in there for people who want to reference that because they already have an application standard that is based on the old recommendation. So both will stay in, but the recommendation will be for byte-wise lexicographic ordering. And this is about the thing I most dreaded when we started talking about canonicalization. You remember ASN1, which had CER and DER, and we are doing the same thing. So yeah, too bad, sorry about that, but maybe that's to be expected for canonicalization. So the other thing is that we probably want to be more specific in our recommendations for floating point canonicalization. Currently, the text simply has 3 variants you can choose from. And the question is, should we express preferences here? Still, an application is free to do something different, but should we express preferences? And my proposal is to have a general rule that in canonicalization, we prefer the shortest encoding in all cases. For integer, for length information, for strings, for tag numbers, but also for floating point, for big nums, for big floats, and so on. So that would be a recommendation that would cover all places that would kind of be unsurprising for people. But again, they can go ahead and do the application dependency if they need to.
I don't have a preference on the float. I don't really care one way or the other. I worry about doing things like big nums simply because you're removing a tag which may have been explicitly put in the tree. So you're actually changing something very significant.
Yes, so there is an assumption here that big nums and the short integers are coming from the same space, that you don't want to have a map that has a big num 1 and a fixed num 1 as 2 different keys. And I think I'm behind that assumption. But let's hear about that.
That would not be true in the world I'm thinking of in terms of some stuff.
Okay, can you tell us more?
I play more in the cryptographic world.
Yes.
So big nums and integers are completely different things.
Okay.
Matt's
So-
nodding his head
so
behind you.
what do you use a big num 1 for?
That could be.
Paul Hoffman can answer that. The first thing in a counter that has to have 128 bits in it.
Yes, and why can't you represent this in 64 bits or in 32 bits or in?
Because the counter is supposed to be 128 bits.
Yeah, but that's true of all integers. Integers in Cbor are 64 bits, but we represent them in 32 bits, in 16 bits, in 8 bits, if we can. So how is that different from big numbers? I mean, the question really is there ever a situation in which big num actually makes you take a different application path than the same number expressed as an integer?
If you look at, for example, a DSA signature, it consists of 2 integers,
Yes.
which I would probably represent as big nums. One of those integers could be 1.
Yes. But how would it help if you canonicalize this to a normal one? I mean, in the DSA signature, you know this is a DSA signature, so you know that this is the what are those parts? Are they exponents?
RNS.
Yes, R&S. So you know what these are. So by canonicalizing them down to the shorter representation, you don't lose any information.
This is Jeffrey Yaskin. 2 examples from the WebAuthn FIDO security key space. Adam Langley tested a bunch of security keys for their ASN1 dir output and discovered that many of them had bugs in which length they gave to the numbers. If a number was a byte shorter, many of them forgot to shorten the dir representation. And so in our preference for the canonical encoding, are we going to introduce those bugs into implementations of Cbor-based protocols? The second example was there's a geolocation extension to WebAuthn which uses floating point. And when I suggested shortest encoding for the floats, they yelled at me. They said, make it the 64-bit floats because that's simpler to implement. Now I don't feel that strongly because this is just a preference. Individual applications can make the other decision when it's right for them. But in both cases, the kind of fixed length encoding seemed to be easier to implement.
Matthew Miller. So kind of going back a little bit to the cryptographic context. So especially if it's used as a counter, the semantics, what it's really meaning is the semantics are treated as a counter, but its syntax is expected to be a set of bits this many long. And losing that information can be catastrophic to decrypting, for instance. Now, I kind of have the same feeling as like Jeffrey pointed out that it's often easier to just have an encoding and have a size and just everything works against that when you're dealing with canonicalization issues. I would almost propose that if we're going to go down this road, that if we propose shortest encoding, or really if we propose anything, that we need to make it clear to people reading this that you will need to make some very, very careful considerations of your own application to see if that still applies correctly.
So there is one case where we actually are using a Cbor encoding of an integer, where we always wanted that to be 5 bytes. And we just represent it as a byte string. So on the Cbor level, it's a byte string. That the application then turns this into an integer is not visible on the serialization level. So that would be my way to handle these things, which really need to be constant size for some reason.
Joe Hildebrand from the floor. I just wanted to remind us that we have another option here, which is the relatively nuclear one of saying canonicalization considered harmful. Please do not do this ever. This is why we have bytes in this protocol. And then punting.
But this is not an alternative. We can do both.
We could, but if it gets to the point where we can't make these kinds of decisions, we always have, we could decide that it is in our architectural opinion, it is a bad pattern to do canonicalization of any wire protocol, and it's always wrong. I'm not saying that I almost believe this. I don't quite believe this, but I almost believe that it is impossible to do a good enough canonicalization that interoperates well into the future all the edge cases that we haven't thought about for all protocols. And so you should just avoid doing canonicalization in your protocols.
Okay, we have someone in the queue also. If you want to answer, Carsten, otherwise
Yeah, just quickly, there are applications of canonicalization beyond crypto. So in the crypto case, we have learned that this is a bad idea. In the case of hashing some data structures by their representation, that can be a very reasonable thing to do. In particular, if this representation is not a monster thing, but it's just 3 integers or something like that, and using that as a unique hash key is something that we probably want to support.
Tiago.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the fact that what do you expect to happen if you decode and re-encode with a canonical compliant encoder? Would you expect it to take, for example, that big num and convert it to an integer? Could you hear the question?
Yes, I'm trying to understand what
Because the consequence of this is that you change the stream if it actually changes from a big num to an integer, which means that the other side, the one that actually created that byte array, might no longer be able to interpret it if it did not understand big nums in the first place. So to canonicalize big nums, you actually make big nums mandatory feature for all implementations. Would you agree with that? And do you think that that should be the case?
Well, I believe any decoder that finds a big num with a value 1 is free to turn this into a 1. So that's maybe a somewhat more expansive answer than the question you answered. Now, one other thing that a decoder may want to do is check canonicalization. So look at the stream and see whether it's actually canonically encoded, which trivially may be done by re-encoding it and comparing it. But you may want to put this into your decoder. So that's another function that a decoder for canonical encoding may want to have. Tiago, did that answer your question?
It did. It did not satisfy me, but did answer.
I take it he's done.
Yeah, go ahead.
Matthew Miller again. So kind of going back to Joe Hildebrand's suggestion, which I contemplated coming up here much earlier to suggest maybe as an alternative nuclear option, punting on this completely and letting it be in a separate document that we can hash over.
This is Jeffrey Yaskin. Again, in response to Joe's comment, I got advice from Adam Langley that all of the specs that I do should specify canonical output in order to facilitate testing, because then you only have to assert that your bytes are this, not in this set. And then that decoders should enforce canonicalization so that, again, the encoders are constrained to produce that canonical output. I think it is totally plausible for this document to not say what the canonical encoding should be. The change that I wrote gives kind of a base canonicalization for the basic generic data model, but not the extended generic data model, and gives that a name so that other specifications can refer to it when they're defining their own canonicalization. And I think that's sufficient. We don't have to express preferences about how to canonicalize big nums or floats. We just say other specifications must specify it.
This is a comment from Sean. I guess the point is, to what extent is Cbor type and tag information supposed to be preserved when serializing between different implementations? I guess this is Jim now. I tend to agree with that question because Are you trying to canonicalize the data model, or are you trying to canonicalize the Cbor structure?
Yes.
You can't. The two of them are going to be different. Are going to give you different answers.
Yeah. So indeed, in the data model, an integer is an integer, and the data model doesn't tell you whether you need to encode this with a particular length field or directly immediately in the first byte. So the encoder actually has a choice there. And there's also an assumption that a decoder discards the information which length was actually used because it's none of the business of the application to look at that length. So that's a pretty strong statement, but I think that's something that's really important to enable generic decoders. Because if a weird application for some reason starts to key on serialization details, then you need a completely different decoder, which, by the way, will be by a factor of 3 slower than the one that just discards this information. So I think it's important to be able to discard irrelevant information in a decoder. Now, whether that applies to int versus big num, we certainly can discuss. I personally believe it does, but the specification currently takes no position.
Sean Leonard, this is responding to Matt's comment. I think it's worth a separate document which also may define canonicalization, but I agree with Joe that an option is just to say, don't do it.
This is Joe Hildebrand from the floor. Going back to the question that was asked from the Jabber room, I do think it is a property that if something is in canonical form as bytes in the wire, and I get those bytes, and I parse them, and I regenerate canonical form, 100% of the time those bytes have to match exactly no matter what the canonical include is. I mean, that's what canonical means, right? Without that property, we have nothing. So that's not exactly the question that was asked, but I think that's the, like if I take random stuff in and out the canonical stuff, it's always going to be different slightly in all the different ways. But if I take canonical stuff in, it should come back out canonicalized exactly the same. Or we shouldn't do canonical.
And for me, this is almost the definition of canonical.
Right, but it felt like there was a definitional question.
Yeah.
Paul Hoffman, given that, and I've just been thinking about what you've been saying, Carson, about that a decoder should throw away unimportant information. We've heard examples, and I've certainly seen them, and you and I talked about this when we were doing this the first time, where decoders throw things away and then make an assumption about what they're looking at. I think it's important for us to keep this, what you are considering irrelevant information, so that a big num coming in as a 1 still is a big num 1 once you've taken it in. And therefore, I think that we have exactly the two choices of pretty much keep everything or don't do canonicalization. And you and I went through this a whole bunch, because by the way, for those of you in the room, I was the one who said canonicalization, and Carson was just screaming madly from Germany, like for a week, about no. And this was mostly due to crap that Jim and I have dealt with in ASN1, from earlier. I think that we're now in the same rabbit hole again. And I think what we should do for this document is to say canonicalization is hard, or OMG, as you put on the previous slide. We are not going to recommend things. We are going to give some observations about canonicalization, but you make up your own rules and you're going to cry.
This is Jeffrey Yeskin. I think I would heartily endorse a statement that generic canonicalization is a bad idea, because the generic thing cannot tell whether your big num mattered, whether it mattered that it was a big num. But I think protocol-specific canonicalization is important, whether in this document or another one. Thanks.
Matthew Miller. Look, I mean, ultimately, this data format has some pretty strong ideas of what types are, as opposed to JSON, where we absolutely needed to do these things, or you're going to run into big problems. And these big problems weren't so much that two different things might have the same core meaning, but might serialize them out differently. They would blow up. And that from everything I've observed, that's not the case here. So I don't, I would be cautious on trying to go too far down any road around the canonicalization or dangers, other than things that are super obvious, which right now there's not really anything. So I guess this is just yet one more vote to just not deal with canonicalization in this document.
So this is Joe Hildebrand from the floor again. I believe that a world that had 20 different Cbor canonicalization mechanisms, each of which a generic library probably had to implement separately from one another with all of their minor twiddles, would be a world that is strictly worse than where we are today. It would be worse in enough ways that I think ASN1 starts to look good again. And I think that, and that's those of you, that's why Matt made that noise. Those of you who have heard my various rants on ASN1 know that that's a relatively strong statement. If we look at dir versus BER versus PER versus XER versus what have you in ASN1, that is an anti-pattern. And I get that those are encoding rules and not canonicalization rules, but they're related. The ways that fails are related here in the myriad number of little bits that I need to write an ASN1 system in order to parse their entire world and generate their entire world. And I really, really don't want that. So I would be okay with saying one of three things I'd be fine with. Number one, never canonicalize, it's evil. Number two, here is a canonicalization mechanism either in this doc or a different doc. Those are the three things, either in this doc or a different doc. I would not be fine with number four, which is, hey, canonicalization might be interesting. Here's some stuff you might want to consider and go write your own and let there be many of these. I think would be a failure. So this would be
channeling Sean Leonard. My first impression is that there's a big distinction between equivalence of major data types, i.e. 0x01 versus 0x0001 when they're both ints, and the equivalence of tagged data types. So that'd be, big num of 1 versus an int of 1 because of the big num tag.
Okay, so I think we still have to decide whether this becomes a separate document or is done in the main document. I think all the other questions remain on the table either way. So I think we can discuss the technical issues independent of the procedural issue, how we handle this. So I'm a fan of batteries included, so where my preference would be. But if it's too hard to fix this in a reasonable time frame, then we may be better off factoring this out.
I have a patch to improve some other bits of Cbor's definition, but I think that the rest of the spec is fairly close to ready. And from the discussion here, it sounds like canonicalization is not. So just to make progress easier, I think I suggest that we pull out canonicalization now into its own document and proceed on them in parallel.
So Alexi is nodding his head and thumbs upping that. I did just want to point out that what we're doing here is moving to.
The impression I got from the room is it in between strongly saying that it's a bad idea, which is one or two sentences, saying very little, or doing it in a separate document. If people can agree on saying very little or strongly saying against it, hopefully you can do it quickly. If you want to do anything more, you should do a separate document. That's, I mean.
So, and keeping in mind that what we're doing here is moving to full standard.
That definitely looks like it's not baked.
So we could also spin again before going to full standard. We could do another.
Paul Hoffman. Thinking of process here, I think that the vast majority, if not everything else in this document, has strong consensus, and this doesn't. To me, that calls for a separate document. And in moving to full standard, one of the things that's acceptable is to split out stuff from the early one that, in fact, didn't work. And in this case, didn't work. Yeah, or removing stuff. But in this case, didn't work means didn't have as strong consensus as everything else.
And Paul, before you go and before we get to Tiago, I have a clarifying question. Would you see the thing that does not include canonicalization, the thing that is going to full standard, taking a strong ref on that document or not?
Yes, I think it's fine to say the previous document started down the rat hole. We are now simply removing the rat hole. Maybe a different document will happen. You know, having a forward ref and a full standard is like a bad idea.
Well, I mean, it would pause getting a number, but
yeah,
it might be procedurally the right thing.
It might be, but I think a better thing is to say is there might be a standards track document, or there might be a document in the future for this, and leaving it at that, because in fact we might not have consensus on the separate document either. I don't want to bet that we will.
I mean, that separate document could also say updates the full standard, although updates a full standard is odd, isn't it?
Yes, and I think wrong. I don't think you can update a full standard unless you are at full standard.
Well,
so that doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I
fair
think for this document we can say we took it
Yeah,
out for a reason.
Yeah.
And it might get pulled back into the universe in a different document.
Yeah, so since we already have the text for the separate document, there will be an internet draft for that tomorrow morning, so we can start working on it. I think I'm taking home that this is the best way. Splitting out is the best way. And I think Jeffrey gave an example of why even including strong language about the benefits of having a deterministic encoding, which is a term I prefer over canonicalization, is a useful thing in cases that we don't have battle scars for.
Okay, Tiago had something to say.
Just wanted to point out that the equivalence for keys that you had in the extended data model might need to be yanked out as well, because that ties very closely with canonicalization and making sure that no keys are repeated.
I think that's a good point that we need to analyze. I don't think it's obvious what the answer to that is. Sorry, let me say that in the microphone. What I mumbled to myself was, that's a good point. It's not obvious to me what the answer to that is. We should probably do a little bit of analysis before snapping into judgment.
Well, my view would be that if we cannot do equivalence for keys, then we should stick with 7049, because that solves the problem. And taking that out would be a major mistake. But I also don't think that it actually raises exactly the same problems.
It's not the same problems, but it is to be looked at. So I agree with whoever just said there. We just need to take a look.
Completely agree.
Yes, thank you. I think we can move on.
Okay. So that's all I had on the document. Did I miss anyone's?
Go forward one slide from what we have.
Yeah, so this was just a reminder. Oops, this is the old one? No. This is just a reminder that we have this implementation metrics. Francesca already mentioned it, and we will all have, those of us who have an implementation will want to look at this again and see what we can fill in there. It's not a formal requirement, but I think it's just prudent, it's just sanity checking to do this at this point in time.
This is Jeffrey Eskin, not directly related to any of the slides. In making changes to Cbor BIS over the last period, I think several people sent pull requests and discussed it a little bit on the list, and then kind of all at the end, Paul merged them all, and it was hard to tell whether consensus had been reached, whether they could have been merged earlier. And of course, earlier merging makes it easier to write later ones without conflicts, and it's a conflict which caused the duplication of the data model section. So I want to see if there's a better way to get to determine consensus on the list to accept a pull request.
There are several small nits in what's in the master right now that we probably have to raise at some point.
In general, we said that pull request for big parts of the document should go to the mailing list. I think that's what you have done for most of them. And I understand that there were like old pull requests that they weren't considered when merged, like that new pull request updated the same parts, etc. Yeah, so I don't know what's the best way to solve this, but yeah, working with the editors and working group, that's, I think.
Yeah, and just us trying to get a little bit more aggressive about merging when we think the consensus has been reached. And I think, if you've got a pending pull request and it feels like the discussion might be over, and if you ask the chairs to, move the ball along.
Also, in general, I noticed that people come up and scream when they really don't agree with something. So when the list is fairly silent, or you have had some consensus, that means that also for the editors that this pull request could be merged in.
Maybe we can define a cadence for when we do that. So, I mean, if nobody is screaming for 0.5 microseconds, that doesn't tell us very much.
No, of course.
So we need to have a little bit, it's not a last call kind of situation, but a little bit of an idea, how long can we take to respond to something before it's counted as consensus?
Paul Hoffman, I think 3 weeks for just, for a dead discussion, if it's been dead for 3 weeks, because it's going to turn into a draft, and if we did it wrong, people are going to say, pull it out.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay, so the answer to the question, how do we fix this, is move faster, and I completely agree with that. Anything else on Cbor BIS?
So about this implementation metrics, I think we got the implementations that were decided during last IETF meetings. So thank you, Tiago and Jim and Joe, for filling this in. So Karsten, your input is we need to fill in more columns. Do
You
you?
don't need to, but it would be really useful.
Mm-hmm. So do you have ideas, names, implementers, or does anybody in the working group has?
Chrome has two implementations that are not on here, which I will get someone or I will fill in something.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you.
And as we discussed sort of off mic before the meeting, what we're not looking for is for people to do a bunch of work in order to fill out the rows here and to make sure that they've got the most complete implementation possible. What we're looking for is what did you implement so that we know what was interesting for you to implement for your use cases.
And just a quick comment, right now not everybody has writing rights on this wiki page, so just send me an email and I will update this.
So just for information, the GitHub Wiki is a repository, so you actually can check that out, make changes. You just cannot do a pull request in the general way, but you can operate on it in a Git way.
What else?
Okay, next. Tag definitions. Batteries included. There are some tags in the document. There are a few tags out there, and we don't need a working group to do tags. Everybody can do tags, but there are maybe a few things that where we actually want working group attention. And just as a reminder that this is going on, Cbor web token just got approved. Has been in the RFC editor queue for 4 days. So that is a Cbor tag that we can be pretty proud of. That's good work. There are a few drafts out there. 2 of them are on charter by selection of the people who wrote the charter. The OID one needs work. We have known that for a while. We just have to find time to do the work. The array one is on charter, and this one author thinks it's ready for adoption. Just to remind you what it is, it mainly provides tags for homogeneous arrays represented in byte strings. So JavaScript has typed arrays. There is a Kronos standard for typed arrays and so on. There's pretty much an industry consensus for what these typed arrays are. And we are just providing tags for them so we can use them seamlessly in Cbor documents. So this document takes the position that tags are reasonably cheap, so we can put the type information, what exactly is in the homogeneous array, into a tag, which together with the various data types and the various representation lengths leads to a total of 24 tags, where 2 of them are actually equivalent because endianness of 8-bit values is not particularly interesting. But apart from that, it's a pretty much filled matrix. So this is the main thrust of this draft. It turned out that in some implementations, it's actually useful to have a warning or a tag that tells you arrays that are represented in the traditional style, in the classical style, are homogeneous. So Cbor doesn't tell you that you have to have all the same types in one array, but you have to just define the tag to say it will be. Of course, you can find that on your own, but it may be good for a decoder to know that upfront. And finally, we got requests for multi-dimensional arrays. And since it's easy to turn a one-dimensional array into a multi-dimensional array, there is a tag for that. So this is tag 07. And that document has been out for a while, and it kind of got stuck on the question, should these tags come out of a 2-byte space or a 3-byte space? So I showed this slide the last time. I don't really want to do this again, but at some point we have to decide. We have some reviews on the document. So Paul noticed we probably have to be a bit more explicit on the endianness issues. Jim doesn't like that we are putting the type information in the tag, but I'm pretty sure this is what most people would want at this point in time. So I try to defend the other position. We probably need an example for multidimensional out of non-typed array. One question that came up, do we need column major?
Fortran style.
Do you fill the array?
Yeah, so I didn't say it in the mic. Yeah, so what I said was this is the way that Fortran stored arrays.
An additional bit in that header.
No, it stored them column major,
Column order.
column order instead of
Thank you. Didn't
Yes.
understand that.
the opposite direction than the way you usually do this in C, which is the way that everybody's done it since. Yes,
No, I don't know, probably 80 did it that way.
I don't remember.
Yeah, so unless anybody comes up and screams, I think the answer is no. Homogeneity probably needs a little more examples. The document tells you homogeneity is in the eye of the beholder, but it doesn't give enough examples for that. So Jim provided one, and we should put that in. Then of the 24 tags, of the array of 24 tags that we reserve, one is actually unused, and the current document proposes to declare this as reserved. Yes, this is intentional, but of course we could use it for something. So it's there. We just don't want to have something completely unrelated in the middle of this 24.
You have 8 that are not used.
No?
32 minus
on the mic.
Yeah, but these aren't even reserved.
Can you speak on the mic?
Oh, these aren't, thank you, these aren't even reserved. So this is just the whole that is created by the fact that big endian uint8 is the same thing as a little endian uint8. And so we only use one of the two tags and reserve the other one.
Jim Shot, my comment was actually about the other 8, which I wasn't too sure if you intended to leave them open or if you wanted to reserve them in case you did something else funky to end up using them.
Well, I think these typed arrays have been around for more than 5 years, and I haven't exactly heard an idea of what to put in the fourth column here. We should never say never, but I would say just leave them unallocated, and people can allocate them for other things.
Jim nods.
Okay. And finally, just about anything that might deal with large items probably needs a little bit of security considerations text. So yeah, that should be added. So one reason I wanted to have this on the agenda today is there is actually a registration request pending at IANA in the first come, first served space for doing pretty much the same thing in a slightly less ordered way. And IANA will have to take that registration. So that would be a nice run around the working group. I have tried to contact the author of that registration. I haven't succeeded yet, but I will continue trying. So that kind of creates a little bit of an urgency that we finally come to grips with what to do about those array tags. So yeah, the remaining question is this one, I think.
Hoffman, it's fine to take it from the 2-byte range. I'm one. Jim, you can get up and say that. Just don't point fingers at us. I believe that this is an obvious use I believe there isn't a more obvious use that we would necessarily need to keep these out, and I think this is just fine.
Jim Schott, I think it's fine. I would rather take them from the 3-byte range. There's no need to try to conserve space for this, and that makes sure that you don't end up later regretting the decision. Channeling Sean Leonard, what is the pending IANA registration? And unfortunately, I don't know what he's referring to.
Well, I have a little bit of a process question here. Sorry.
How do you?
Sorry.
I don't know,
Can you
Mark.
just click on the play left.
Okay.
So I'm not sure, since I'm the designated expert who got this on the desk, I'm not sure what I can actually say about that.
So we can, Alexi can find somebody to do it for this one, to be the reviewer separately. Like, what happens when the person who's the reviewer wants something in the registry for themselves? So we, okay, so do we need another expert for this?
Unless it's, standard direct thing where you probably.
Could you talk to Mike? So
But that's not my problem. My problem right now is that I got this request
yes.
and I don't know how much I can talk about it.
Oh, that's something Alexi can.
You can talk to me because I'm the chain of appeal,
Good.
I think.
Okay, but essentially what they did, and there is a GitHub repository with the request in it, so it's not totally secret. What they did is they just defined a bunch of tags for a few items out of the whole array that they needed. And these come from first come first served space, so that they are 3-byte tags. So they would kind of pre-answer this question. But they are also not in this nice arrangement that allows automatically interpreting the tag number.
Right. I think contacting them and recommending that, look, this is the work which is very similar. It's very sensible thing.
I already did that, yes.
If
but
it's
I didn't get a reply.
right, if it's first come first serve, then I suppose you cannot stop them.
Okay, so I should go ahead and put
But-
in my own registration request.
No.
We cannot stop them. We can convince them. So that's an avenue that we still have. If they really want this,
Yes,
They
or
will
if
have
we
it.
are really pissed off, we have to change the IANA registration procedure, and we need to do it quickly. I suppose ISG can override it.
Yes,
So,
I guess.
so
I mean, all right. So if anybody wanted to stand up and say, "Hey, let's change the registry rules," like,
I'm standing up.
oh, you do want to change the registry rules
Yes.
to expert review for everything,
No.
to first come first serve for everything.
Just ratchet up the requirements a little bit. So we get more control over the 1+1 byte space and so on. So I think I sent a message to the various.
but it's not going to affect this
It's
request
not going to affect
anyways,
this.
so.
Right.
And I wouldn't assume that these people are want to do something evil. I just haven't managed to talk to them yet. So.
Fast comment from Sean. A week plus 1 for 3 range, for the 3-byte range. He's worried that we may want to come along and do some additional links that are even longer at a later date.
Zach Shelby on. I have to lick the mic almost. We did something similar in core with CoApp. I'm the designated expert. Bad one, but still. And I thought that was quite useful to protect your everybody wants their thing, their shiny object, and the most efficient registration class, and not all things are created equal from just how widely they're going to be used and deployed point of view, which I think is something the designated expert in the working group can make a better call on. So I would agree, you need some separation of rules there. Just what we saw in core is just everybody went for the smallest one all the time. So.
Yeah, just one data point. CWT got tag 61 and content format 61. But CWT is maybe even more important than array tag. So just one data point. Okay, so I hear a few people saying 1 plus 1 byte space, 2 byte space is fine. And a few more people saying 1 plus 2 byte space is where we should be going, because we want to finish this discussion at some point in time. It seems like we are getting ourselves into 1.2 byte, 1 plus 2 byte space. So that would be my summary of the discussion. I'm not happy because I still want to do these RGB values in this short encoding, but maybe. Okay, so the plan is to take these review comments here, do a next version of the document, and we should have adopted it a long time ago because we are not changing the fundamentals, we're tweaking on the details. But I do a -08 based on this, and then please do the action.
Just while we've got everybody here, does anybody object to us taking this up as a working group draft? Because if I'm just looking to see if anybody did, we could have that discussion now, since we're all here. I don't see anybody jumping up to object. And are there at least a couple people who think this is interesting work for us to do? I don't want to do a hum because I don't think there's only going to be 1 or 2 people. Go ahead. All right. So I asked for objections, didn't see any. Okay. Oh, Sean has something. Oh, you got it. Good.
Sean, about the RGB. It's interesting, but I was recently thinking about high dynamic range. I think RGB is a bit more complicated in this day of 4K, HDR10, Dolby Vision, and all that. It probably needs some specialized data types of its own, which is to say outside the purview of this JWatch typed data arrays structure.
And then he says one more thing.
I agree the typed array should be worked on by the working group.
Which is relevant. Okay.
So yeah, submit next version answering these comments, and then we can adopt this document.
Okay, so will you verify this now on the mailing list while I'm doing the show 8?
And then you could just publish it as the 00 from the working group. That's what you're saying?
I can do that as well.
Well, let's
like
validate it on the list.
Yeah, I like publishing 00s that are identical to the last personal one.
Yes.
But,
okay.
Let's do that.
Okay, good.
Good.
Yeah.
So I think I'm done.
Oh, we have 7 minutes. Incredible. So we have open mic.
Some more office hours if anybody.
If anybody wants to say anything.
Did anybody not get the blue sheet? Yeah, before we go, I have one more quick thing. I'm going to be stepping down as working group chair for Cbor here. I won't be coming to IETF meetings as regularly going forward for a variety of reasons. And if you are interested in chairing, talk to Alexi and do it quickly because he's already got some interest in a variety of folks. But if you think you're the right person, this would be a fantastic time to pull Alexi aside. Anything else? No? All right, great. Thanks, everybody.
Great.
I did some good work. I wasn't cheap, and they